I was down at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, about almost 11,000 meters below the sea. And that actually makes me the first person. I'm now the first person who's gone pole to pole, space, and deep. So all 4 points. I'm the first. So it's like the Empire State Building sitting on your head, all of it. There are certain aspects of it that are indeed the most extreme environments that people have gone to ever yet. First, I'm Richard Garriott. Richard Garriott de Caillou is actually my full name. I am a video game developer and an explorer. I have created video games for about 45 years, really since the inception of the industry. But sort of simultaneous to that career, I've had sort of a second passion, which is not only as an explorer, but also building exploration companies to help people explore to the extremes. And so I've helped build companies and simultaneously have gone on to explore areas as diverse as the Antarctic all the way to the South Pole, the North Pole relatively recently, into space. I lived in the International Space Station for 2 weeks in 2008. And then most recently, just a week ago, I was down at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, about almost 11,000 meters below the sea. And that actually makes me the first person. I'm now the first person who's gone pole to pole, space, and deep. So all 4 points. I'm the first.
We of course wrote about this record, which is extraordinary. I was wondering, are you proud of this accomplishment? Like, was it an aim to build a record like this, or was it like a side effect?
To be honest, it was a side effect. My real goal was, my passion was getting into space. Most of those explorations were stepping stones on the way to space. However, after I actually made 2 trips to the South Pole before space. But I actually never imagined that the deepest part of the ocean would become available. Very fortunately, now a good friend of mine, Victor Vescovo, has been building this new submarine, this submarine called Limiting Factor. And one of his goals was to be able to dive all the deepest oceans on Earth. It means it could make repeated dives. And that means he now had a system that would not only let him do what he wanted to check off, but also allow science to begin to take place in all of the deeper oceans around the globe. And that is a place there has been no other machine. The bottom half of the depth of all of the oceans has been basically unreachable by humans other than these one-off attempts until right now.
So would you say that it was more difficult to travel to the bottom of the ocean, like to space?
There's a great deal of similarity in the engineering, and the place where they differ, deep sea exploration is much harder. And what I mean by that is on the inside of a capsule, whether it's going to space or the deep sea, the life support systems are almost identical. I mean, literally, it is CO2 scrubbers to take out the carbon dioxide of your breath, and oxygen bottles to add oxygen back in. You have radios on the spacecraft. You have acoustic radios sonographic radios on the submersible, but very similar. The real difference is that when you are in space, the spacecraft is holding in 1 atmosphere of pressure compared to the 0 pressure on the outside. In the case of going deep, the submersible hull has to hold out 1,000 times the 1,000 atmospheres of pressure. It's 10 tons per square inch. So it's like the Empire State Building sitting on your head, all of it. And that sphere has to be, first of all, it's 9 centimeters thick of titanium. It has to be made perfectly round, because when it's perfectly round, it's like 99.99% perfectly round. And that's so that the pressure that's crushing it shrinks it, but doesn't fold it. Mm. If there were imperfections in the spherical nature of it, as it shrinks, it would buckle and kill the occupants. I took an electronic measuring device so I could hold it against the hull on one side, aim the laser at the other side, and measure the shrinking of the interior space. And the interior space started at 1.446 meters and shrank and shrank and shrank down to 1.440 meters,
wow.
which is 6 centimeters. So it shrunk by about the width of my little fingernail, smaller. Titanium, 9 centimeters thick, titanium is crushed that much smaller just because of the pressure at that depth. So it's from an engineering standpoint, there are certain aspects of it that are indeed the most extreme environments that people have gone to ever yet.
How long did it take to travel down? Was it 5 hours?
4 hours. So
4
it's
hours.
4 hours to descend to the bottom at a pretty fast rate. You're going down fast, but it's 7 miles. So it takes you 4 hours to descend to the bottom. Then we spend 4 hours exploring on the bottom, and then it's 4 hours to get back to the top. So the total round trip is about 12 hours, with about 4 hours of that taking place at the bottom.
I just imagine going down and down and down, and soon there's no more light, and you have these measurements, and you know that there's the Empire State Building on top of your head, and you have no opportunity to escape because you're at the bottom of the ocean, and there are like a handful of people who have traveled this far down. Weren't you scared?
You know, it's interesting. In spacecraft or submersibles, the one thing you wouldn't want to be is claustrophobic.
Yeah.
You know, they're very, very small spaces. And in both cases, before you dive in these or go up in them, in this case of spacecraft, you know, you review all of the engineering and safety procedures in detail to make sure that, first of all, you feel comfortable, but also to know that you will react appropriately if there is an emergency circumstance. And I have found that once you go through all that training and understanding, that it's no longer cause for fear. Even if you understand, you know, the statistical aspects of the safety or danger. And interestingly, for deep submersibles, there has been no fatalities in the history of deep submersibles. For submarines like military submarines or submarines that go to shallower depths, there have been fatalities, quite a few in history. But for any of these scientific instruments that have gone to great depths, there's never been a fatality. And while there are lots of opportunities for parts and pieces to fail on the outside, like thrusters or batteries or manipulator arms and all these things that are exposed to the pressure often fail, but the life support inside this little bubble is engineered with great care to make sure that no matter what else goes wrong, that sphere will return to the surface. And that's always worked. And so I've been very comfortable that no matter what else might go wrong, and things actually went wrong on all the dives that we were part of, and all the dives I know of that I'm still, you know, keeping track of, you know, there's always little things that go wrong, but it's never the foundational safety issues. But you still want to understand how to operate safely in that environment, and how, in case your pilot passes out, you know, has a heart attack, you want to make sure you understand the basic operations enough to phone home and get this thing back to the surface.
What exactly did you see when you were there? How did it feel like?
When Don Walsh and Jacques Piccard went to the bottom, and when James Cameron went to the bottom, they would describe it as an empty, flat, muddy-bottomed plane, and not much else. No life, nothing of interest. It's basically the way they would describe it. It turns out, you know, if you descend only to that deepest point and kick up some mud and go, hooray, I've been here, that's basically all you'll see. However, if you have a submersible like this one that can, first of all, move very freely around on the bottom and make multiple dives, and in addition to this submersible, they send down 3 landers, 3 machines that just drop to the bottom and sit on the bottom, but they have scientific equipment on board and lights and cameras and can do sampling capabilities. The life forms that live in the water column all the way to the bottom, what their food supply is things that fall from the sky above them, you know, fall from the water column above them, dead fish and material that rains down onto the seafloor. And so as soon as you put bait down on the seafloor, and you have the ability with lights and cameras and movement to go explore, you actually see that it's an incredibly bountiful landscape. So first, that silty impression is true, that there is a very light, fluffy mud that is everywhere on the bottom. So, all this silt that settles down at this great depth, the water is so dense at this point that a lot of stuff will not really settle hard on the bottom and almost kind of floats up like a fluff. And so it's like talcum powder. It's very easy to stir up and make a big visual mess. But if you float above it, you'll see that there's animal tracks in it. And if you go over to one of the landers that we land a couple hours before we bring the submersible down, you will find that there is all kinds of life that is gathered around these food sources that we've brought down to the bottom. There's a variety of what you might describe as tube worms. These things that look like crinoids, if you're familiar with a crinoid. It's sort of it's a cross between an animal and a plant. It's really an animal, but it looks like a plant, that anchor themselves on some of these rocks and are filter feeders. We discovered that there's currents down there. The prevailing wisdom has been that in such a deep basin, so far away from things that cause currents, like the circulation from the equator to the poles of hot and cold water, it was thought there'd be no current down here. But in fact, if you turn off all of your motors and sit quietly, you start drifting along with the current.
When you were there and you discovered, okay, there are currents, and we now have the opportunity to explore them. How did it feel like for you to not only explore this place, but to also to summon new knowledge?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I really enjoy about going to these extreme places, is that when you get a chance to go to these extreme places, you're inevitably running into things nobody has encountered, both challenges to overcome, but also opportunities to both invent new solutions to overcome those challenges, but also bring back samples of things that are probably unique to science.